Hello and welcome to GameSec. This time around I'm talking about all of the 2D Castlevania Metroidvania style games, and love or hate that term, you know exactly the kind of game I'm talking about. And if you don't, this episode's gonna learn you. You go back and forth, you get new powers, you're able to explore new areas with those powers. You know, you get the idea. And now, I don't really consider Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest a proper 2D Metroidvania. I'll cover that another time. But in the meantime, I'm going to look at these in the order that they were released. So, let's go. In 1997, Konami graced the world with Castlevania Symphony of the Night for the Sony PlayStation. This is a direct sequel to the PC Engine CD game that we all know now as Rondo of Blood, which was a Japan-only game at the time. Koji Igarashi worked as a writer and a programmer on the game and helped a bit with its design. However, during production, he took over as co-director, and he'd be key to the series' future. When I first played this game, I was totally blown away that they let you fight the final boss battle from Rondo of Blood right at the beginning, though obviously it's much easier now. And while Rondo of Blood had Richter ride away on his horse after the battle, this one does things differently. You're now playing Dracula's son, Alucard, and you're on a mission to thwart your dad's evil. You're no longer dealing with stages per se, but this game is divided up into several connected areas. They even added lots of RPG elements like leveling up, acquiring and equipping items and weapons, and storing health items. You also gain new abilities as you progress. Most areas are inaccessible until you get the correct ability, like being able to double jump high enough to reach a certain ledge, or turning into a mist in order to fly through gates. You can even turn into a weird wolf thing, and a bat to fly around freely just as long as you have enough magic points, or MP for short. To tie it all together, you have a map that's accessible with the select button so you can keep track of your progress. You don't use your typical whip here, but instead you have tons of different weapons and you can equip different ones in each hand, though some weapons require both hands to hold them. You also have sub-weapons like in the previous Castlevania games and even some original ones. Like Rondo of Blood, if you pick up another sub-weapon, you have a chance to get the old one back again as it just plops out onto the floor for a bit. Exploring this game is extremely fun, and I get hooked every time I play this game. In fact, I've completed both the Japanese and the US version several times. Before this game came out, I didn't think that I would enjoy it because I liked Castlevania just fine the way it was. But boy was I wrong. I loved just relaxing and taking my time exploring. I loved being able to save and come back later. I loved the fast travel warp rooms. And I really loved the new abilities that I'd get. It's super fun to backtrack to areas you've already been to see if there was something that you missed or couldn't previously get to. I remember spending quite a bit of time with the game and getting really close to 100% and fighting what I thought might be the final boss. But then the game turned upside down on me, literally. Now I had an upside down castle to explore with new monsters, and the map completion actually goes up to just over 200%. That just goes to show you how good the design of this game is, because each area had to be made to be explored in two different ways. The graphics and sound presentation is fantastic. If you didn't think the PlayStation could do 2D very well, this game proved you wrong. Everything is vibrant, well-drawn, and animated nicely. There's lots of transparency effects to make things look well beyond the 16-bit days. Same with some rotation effects for multi-limbed enemies and even some scaling effects here and there. And there's plenty of parallax scrolling to add some needed depth. The industry was really trying to kill 2D gaming in the 32-bit era, but this one was having none of that. Artist Ayami Kojima did the illustrations for the game, and I love them. Even if she got Richter totally wrong, as he clearly does not have long hair like her illustration does, but whatever. And the game does recycle a lot of enemy sprites from Rondo of Blood, but in its defense, it has a ton of new ones too. Of course, it goes without saying that the soundtrack is one of the best in that entire generation. Michiru Yamane, who previously worked on Castlevania Bloodlines and Rocket Knight Adventures, really came through here with perhaps the best work of her life. There are lots of different musical tracks, and they range from excellent to absolutely outstanding. And I've got to at least briefly mention the wonderful voice acting that this game provided.
You seem human, and yet What do you here?
This was also ported to the Saturn, in Japan only. Unfortunately, the results were not very good as it had a lot of dithered graphics and tons of slowdown. It did add a few brand new areas to explore though. You could also play as Richter right away, and it even added the ability to play as Maria. I've covered the differences in this one previously, so check out episode 184, Piss Poor Ports, if you want all of the details. But I had to mention it here as I wanted to include all of the 2D Castlevania games in this genre. Suffice it to say, Symphony of the Night on the PlayStation is one of my favorite games ever. And apparently I'm not the only one who liked it and bought it, as Konami would go on to make many more games in this style. Curiously, all of the Metroidvania titles after Symphony of the Night would only appear on handheld game systems, and that might be because 2D games are deemed too primitive to appear on mainstream consoles, I don't know. But just because they were portable doesn't mean they weren't awesome. Castlevania Circle of the Moon was a launch title for the Game Boy Advance in mid-2001, and it's the second Metroidvania game. In this one, you play as a gentleman by the name of Nathan Graves. In the beginning, your master is kidnapped by Dracula. You, along with your friend Hugh, set out to look for him, separately of course. I remember getting this the same day I got my original Game Boy Advance. I was so stoked to have it, and I played the entire thing to 100% on that non-backlit screen. The first thing to note is that this game was made by Konami Studio in Kobe, and Koji Igarashi didn't work on it at all. But the team did heavily base everything on Symphony of the Night, as you'd expect. It mostly plays quite well, though the controls sometimes feel a hair stiff. Your main buttons jump and attack, and you can press up and attack to use your sub-weapons like the knife, the axe, holy water, and cross of fear. The L and R triggers are for your special abilities. As you make your way through the game, you'll collect items which unlock these abilities, such as being able to smash through stone blocks, or maybe jump onto and bounce off of a wall. Using these abilities often requires you to press the R button at the appropriate time when you want to use them. There's also the card system. Some enemies will drop cards after you defeat them, or you'll simply find them lying around. In the menu, you can mix and match these to gain certain abilities, like maybe a flaming whip, which is actually weaker than the normal whip, but it looks cool, I guess. The one that I really like increases your attack power by 25%. Another increases it even more depending on how much of the map you've uncovered. You can turn these on and off by pressing the L button. When they're on, it eats up MP, which is the blue bar underneath your life bar. Of course, you find items to increase the amounts of hearts you can carry, your overall HP, as well as your overall MP. Enemies also drop items that can be worn on your body or your arms, which will have different effects on your stats. Curiously, the whip you start out with is the main weapon in the game, and the only way to make it better is, of course, to level up. The whip itself is pretty straightforward, literally, though you can hold down the attack button to make it spin for a weaker attack. All he has to do is put some LEDs on that thing, and he reminds me of some of the kids in my neighborhood. And naturally, there are also items to collect which can help heal or cure you. The areas are pretty big, but very basic in their overall design. Many rooms are built to be explored vertically. There are, of course, save rooms and warp rooms scattered all over the place. And it's always a good idea to spend some time grinding if you find a convenient place near a save room. Like Symphony of the Night, you'll spend a lot of time backtracking once you get new abilities to explore the places that you couldn't before. A lot of enemies are recycled from Symphony of the Night and Rondo of Blood, and this is something that we'll see in all of the other Metroidvania games. And honestly, I'm mostly fine with that. There are some new ones here though, like this stupid electric skeleton. You also get tiny bits of story here and there as you play, but it's certainly no literary masterpiece. Overall, the game took me about 16 hours to completely finish 100%. And let me tell you, that's a lot of time to spend without the benefit of a backlight. It can feel kind of tough here and there, but honestly, it's not overly difficult by any means, and it sure is fun. Visually, the game is fairly basic, even for the Game Boy Advance. That doesn't mean it's bad, but you can definitely tell it's an early game for the system. The animation is extremely stiff with very few frames, even on your own character. Later on in the game, the enemies get bigger and have more dazzling effects applied to them, and there's even a bit of scaling and rotation here, but it's used quite sparingly. The stages themselves rarely stand out. The music by Sotaro Tojima and Hiroshi Mitsuoka is pretty awesome though. However, most of it is just rearrangements of music from past games with very little original stuff. Some of it is just straight up lifted from one of the older games with no change at all, like the title screen music. As a result, it takes away a lot of uniqueness from this game's identity. Also, many of the tunes cover multiple areas, so it feels like there's much less music overall than you'd expect. But still, it's good stuff and the arrangements are great. Sadly, it all sounds extremely grainy due to poor use of the Game Boy Advance's PWM sound hardware. Though, interestingly, it's the only Castlevania game on the Game Boy Advance that's actually in stereo. Overall, it's a good adventure, and while it certainly can't match Symphony of the Night, I was still stoked to have a game like this on my Game Boy Advance. Well, I'd sure say that Castlevania got a pretty good start with its outings on the Game Boy Advance. But Igarashi wanted back in. Does that mean it was going to get even better? Castlevania Harmony of Dissonance came a little over a year later, arriving in 2002 also for the Game Boy Advance. Koji Igarashi returned to the series with this game as producer, and you can most certainly tell. For the most part, it seems like a tiny version of Symphony of the Night. This game takes place 50 years after Castlevania on the NES or any of its remakes. You play as Juiced Belmont, or is it Justy? Ah hell, I like Juiced better. So Juiced it is, and Simon Belmont's your granddaddy. In fact, you have the very same whip that Simon used in Castlevania 1 and even Super Castlevania 4. I mean, can't you tell just by looking at it? Anyway, one of your girlfriends has been kidnapped, so you and Maxim start exploring the castle to recover her. Of course you do it separately, and of course you're going to have to fight Maxim later. It's all very predictable. The gameplay system has changed quite a bit compared to Circle of the Moon. For one, it's more balanced and the levels are designed much better. It's way more fun exploring this castle. It does seem floaty when directly comparing it to Circle of the Moon though, but you'll get used to it fairly quickly. Once again, your whip is the only attack weapon that you have, but it can be upgraded with stones. You can kind of wiggle your whip around like in Super Castlevania 4. There's even a stone that you can attach if you want the spinny whip from Circle of the Moon. Again, you still have all of the same sub-weapons. New to this game though are the spell books. If you turn these on and use a sub-weapon, you get an item crash-like effect which can be devastating, but it can sure eat up a lot of magic points. If you use a different spellbook, you get different effects for each sub-weapon, and these are all fun to see. There are lots more item types here as well as money to collect, just like in Symphony of the Night. And yes, there's even a shop where you can buy some stuff. There's also multiple castles to travel through and, of course, multiple endings. The game is super fun to play and, like I said, very well designed. In fact, it makes Circle of the Moon seem kind of amateurish by comparison. There's lots of little details here like collecting furniture scattered throughout the castle. You then set up a room with said furniture just to make it more homey. This, of course, is optional. You've also got some really good enhancements to help you get around. Stuff like a double jump, slide, super jump, and things of that nature. You know, the usual stuff. You don't turn into any bats or fog, but that's okay. What's interesting is that there seems to be fewer save rooms and teleport rooms than what you'd expect. As a result, you'll need to be careful because you can get pretty far from a save room and you don't know when you'll get to the next one unless you've uncovered it already. This game is pretty short and it only takes about 8 hours if you're not going for a 100% completion. It could be longer, but honestly, I'm not complaining. Graphically, the game is a huge leap over Circle of the Moon. The stages have lots of cool details all over the place. I like the flashing lightning here where sometimes it'll show a monster and sometimes it doesn't. There's also much more here in terms of scaling, rotation, and transparency effects, which in turn makes the game feel more advanced. Yeah, I know, sorry, but it really was the best word to use. There's even some nice multi-jointed enemies. Everything is really bright and colorful. And this is because the Game Boy Advance didn't have a backlit screen at the time. This is also the reason why Juiced, Maxim, and even some enemy characters have an ugly outline around them. And I've never liked those damn outlines. I mean, I was able to play through Circle of the Moon just fine without any of these dumb outlines. Musically, the game is incredibly boring. In fact, I'd say it's the worst sounding Castlevania game ever. The sound quality is 8-bit at best. There's only one good musical selection, maybe two. Michiru Yamane only did 3 tunes for this game. Why they didn't just have her compose the entire game is beyond me. Actually, I know why she didn't, and I'll get to that when I talk about the next game. But the music being so dull and uninteresting really does bring the game down a notch as a whole. The cartoony colors and the outline certainly don't help either. Still though, it's a good game and it's definitely worth your time. So the second installment on the Game Boy Advance was definitely better than the first in most ways, not so much in the others. But do you think they can knock it out of the park for the next installment? The answer is absolutely yes. Castlevania Aria of Sorrow was released in 2003 and would be the third and final Castlevania game for the Game Boy Advance. This one was actually in development alongside Harmony of Dissonance for a time. It is the year 2035 and you are Soma Cruz. You're visiting a shrine to view the total eclipse. Naturally, the eclipse causes Dracula's castle to appear and you find yourself waking up just outside of it. The story is cheesy, but it's actually kind of cool too. You'll run into a lot more bits of story as you play this one compared to the previous games. That's because there are many more characters to interact with. First off, you have a ton of different weapons to find or buy, just like in Symphony of the Night. It's always fun seeing how a new weapon feels to kill enemies, and once you find one you like, it's hard to give it up for a stronger yet slower or more awkward one. This game also introduces the Tactical Soul system. As you defeat enemies, sometimes you'll acquire their souls, and you can use these, tactically. Basically, you have 3 slots and each slot lets you switch out certain powers. Some are for attack since you don't have your standard sub-weapons here. Another might provide a special ability when holding down the R button, like being able to float for a while. Third are the effects that are always on, like being able to walk on water. This is a cool system and it's not complicated at all. It's also really fun to mess around with and it's far better than the systems in the previous 2 games. Of course, you have tons of items to acquire to help your attack, defense, and magic abilities. The control is excellent and it doesn't feel floaty at all like Harmony of Dissonance kinda did. Everything is super responsive, well unless you have a big heavy weapon or something. The stage design is even better than Harmony of Dissonance. Secret rooms are back and it's up to you to find them and reap the benefits of anything they may hold. However, I'm not a huge fan of the map. And by that, I don't mean the castle layout, I mean the actual map screen. I prefer my map to look like this instead of this. It really is a very, very minor gripe, and I can still see where I need to go, but I just don't think it's as clear as the normal style maps. In fact, that's probably my biggest complaint with the game. That tells you how good it is. Well, it's also kind of short, at around 10 hours or so unless you're a completionist. But really, for me, that's fine. However, there are additional modes to play after you beat it. For example, you can play as Julius. He's a Belmont that runs around very quickly with his whip. He doesn't level up and he can't use items or change out any of his equipment. He also doesn't gain any new abilities. He has everything he needs right from the start. He's strong enough to get the job done if you can stick with him. It's good for an additional mode, but playing as Soma is where the true meat of the game is. And it is quite meaty indeed. As far as the graphics and sound presentation go, Koji Igarashi definitely listened to the feedback he received from Harmony of Dissonance. He made sure the graphics were as good, or better, and they most certainly are. That's right, no more glowing outlines around any of the characters. The colors are mostly still bright, but they're a bit less cartoony for sure. And finally, the screen doesn't scroll wildly every time you jump like it did in the past 2 games. Well, in the vertically scrolling areas it can, but it's definitely been toned down. The music and sounds have been hugely improved. Michiru Yamane was the primary composer here. Since this game shared development time with Harmony of Dissonance, she couldn't devote as much time to that one, and it certainly shows. The different musical selections truly do enhance your enjoyment as you play and give each area a unique personality. The sound quality of the music is also much better, though you'll still hear some of that Game Boy Advance fuzziness. The sound effects themselves are worth mentioning as well, as they're pretty beefy when you kill certain enemies. It's amazing how these games just kept getting better and better each year, and they were all completely new games. I truly feel that Aria of Sorrow is one of the best games on the Game Boy Advance. Back then, we were getting yearly installments into the Castlevania franchise. Life was awesome, but we'd have to wait nearly 2 years to get the next one, because it was going to be on the new system called the DS. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow is the direct sequel to Aria of Sorrow, and this time it's on the Nintendo DS. This game takes place a year later, and as far as you know, you don't have your powers anymore. But then suddenly an evil lady from a cult appears and attacks you, and you realize that yes, you still do have your powers. Though of course you'll still need to level them all back up, otherwise you just rip through this game. The story is less interesting this time around, but needless to say, you're back inside the castle trying to stop the cult. Since it's on the DS, a few things about the gameplay have been slightly altered or enhanced. Most of what you loved about Aria of Sorrow is in here, including the tactical soul system. Though now, that screen is consolidated with your regular equipment screen instead of being its very own menu item. And since there are more buttons on the DS, you soon get the ability to toggle between 2 sets of equipment and soul setups simply by pressing the X button. This can be convenient for equipping a heavier, slower sword that you only need to use here and there. Or equipping the standard floating magic to get over a big gap and then flipping back to an attack magic. You get the idea. In addition, the A button will do a special attack with your main weapon at the expense of some MP. You can now also enhance your weapons to make them stronger. This is pretty easy to do and not complicated at all. There's also something here about freeing souls that I never quite understood, so I just never bothered with it, and it didn't seem to affect me in the long run. Since it's a DS game, the map lives on the top screen while everything else takes place on the lower screen. This is awesome because you don't need to keep stopping and pressing select to look at the map just to figure things out. And yes, the map is the same style as the one from Aria of Sorrow. You can toggle this to show Soma's stats as well, which is handy when you find a place to grind for experience. Once again, the control is generally excellent and the game is really fun to play. However, it uses the DS touchscreen, and that really brings it down in my opinion. For example, you soon get the ability to break ice blocks by touching the screen. This isn't too bad, but it certainly doesn't enhance the gameplay at all. But the worst part are the seals. A pattern appears on screen and you need to draw it to complete certain things, like finishing off bosses. If you fail, the boss fight will continue, and eventually you'll get another chance to do it again. And it'll go on forever until you get it right. I feel that this is just dumb and it detracts big time from the fun you'll have. What's even worse is that as the game goes on, you'll collect several of these seals and they get more and more complex. There's also this room puzzle where you can use either the touchscreen or the D-pad to arrange the rooms in the proper order. Personally, I'm not really a fan of slide puzzles, so I didn't have much fun here. But hey, at least I'm not forced to use the touchscreen. The game length is roughly the same as the last one at around 10 hours or so. The visuals have taken a huge step up. There's tons more color and detail everywhere now. I like how the snow falls off of the cars in the intro stage. There's even a bit of 3D geometry here and there in some of the backgrounds. And tons of enemies are multi-jointed with rotating limbs and cool effects. Soma looks even better now and his animation has been improved, even though it was already pretty good. And not to mention tons of parallax scrolling all over the place, which makes it look like a little PlayStation or Saturn game. Everything just looks outstanding. The art style for the cutscenes is different though, and seems dumbed down. Ayami Kojima, who usually does the illustrations, wasn't used at all here. This was actually intentional, as they wanted to attract a bigger audience. I guess the bare bones anime look was considered to be the best way to achieve this goal. They don't look awful, but I really do miss Kojima's work. The music is outstanding, and it's much cleaner now since the DS can basically play back standard MP3 files for its music. I don't know if that's what they did here in this particular game, but they could have if they wanted to. The sound effects are often really cool too. Overall, this is a fantastic game, but the touchscreen shenanigans do bring it down somewhat. If it weren't for those pesky touchscreen gimmicks, I might even say Dawn of Sorrow is as good, if not better, than Aria of Sorrow. But just as they did with the Game Boy Advance, Konami kept spitting these out again and again. Next up is Portrait of Ruin. In 2006, Castlevania Portrait of Ruin came out on the DS. At this point, the series was starting to get a little repetitious, so they decided to change some things up. Some things really helped, but other things, well, I could take them or leave them. This one takes place in 1944, and is actually the follow-up to Castlevania Bloodlines on the 16-bit Sega Genesis. You play as Jonathan Morris, the son of the whip dude from Castlevania Bloodlines. Except that you don't have the power to use the whip yet, so in the meantime, you use lots of other weapons, like Soma Cruz in previous games. You're accompanied by Charlotte, and by pressing X, you can switch between them at any time. By pressing A, the other character will appear and help you on screen. Fortunately, they both level up at the same time no matter who you use. They have special abilities like combining to perform a super powerful attack. You may need one character to stay in place while pushing with the other, then switch characters in order to get high enough. Eventually, you get a dollar store version of the double jump feature where you need to bounce off of the other character's shoulders. Don't worry, you get a normal double jump later. This all adds some very slight puzzle elements that certainly aren't hard to figure out, but they really didn't do much for me. But they don't bring the game down either. Another new thing is that this game has a main castle and many different portraits that you can enter. These all have your own maps to complete and bosses to kill. All in all, you have up to 1000% of the map to discover. Since the paintings can be anything, the designers were not restricted to the typical castle setting, which is really a breath of fresh air. I actually love this idea. The main castle acts as kind of a hub world of sorts, and you expand upon it once you gain all of the abilities from ruining each portrait. Yeah, I went there. Once again, the game is presented with the map living on the top screen and everything else below. However, they went back to the original style of maps for this game, and I prefer that. This time, you have two characters that you need to worry about equipping with stuff. As a result, there's a lot more things that can be equipped. I kind of like this. Lots of stuff can be equipped by either character, but other stuff can only be equipped by one or the other. This one also introduces some optional side quests assigned by a ghost named Wind to add a bit of beef to the experience. One thing that I noticed is that it's a touch harder to grind in this game, as the enemies don't seem to give out as much experience. This makes the game feel tougher overall, but I still think it's fair for the average gamer. The best improvement here though is that there's no touchscreen nonsense required. You do have to draw an emblem when you start the game, but that's certainly no big deal. Thank you, Konami. Visually, the game remains great. The added environments in each painting help give the game some variety. As expected, there are lots of reused sprites here. There are a few polygonal enemies here and there, but not a ton. And there's even more in the way of polygons in the background this time, but again, it's a fairly rare sight. And of course, the music is once again amazing. Michiru Yamane did it again, but even Yuzo Koshiro stopped by on his way home to add a few tracks. I found this game immensely fun and very tough to put down. The variety really helps, and the presentation is all around as good as it can get on the system. This is definitely one of the better entries that Koji Igarashi has made. Again, I've got to say that I really did enjoy Portrait of Ruin. However, this next game would be the final Castlevania game that Koji Igarashi would ever produce, though I doubt he knew it at the time. Let's take a look. Finally, in 2008, we got Castlevania Order of Ecclesia, once again on the DS. This one takes place back in the 1800s, and once again there have been plenty of changes for this installment. You play as Shinoa, who's a shard binder. Oops, actually you're a glyph binder or something like that. I really didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the story, as honestly it's not very interesting. This time around, the game is all about glyphs. You can absorb them after defeating enemies, or sometimes you even find them just hanging around waiting for you. You can equip these and they become your weapons. There are a bunch of different weapons just like the other games, and some are quick and others are slow. You can assign a weapon to the Y and the X button, either the same weapon or two different ones. If you alternate pressing the buttons, even slow weapons can become pretty fast, which is nice. You can also install a glyph for a special move, like this magnetic thing which can fling you in certain directions. There are now a bunch of tutorials which slow down the pace, but fortunately they're pretty quick. When you use an ability or even attack, it'll use up MP. That's right, even attacking uses up your magic points. Fortunately, if you stop attacking for a bit, it'll refill pretty fast. By pressing up an attack, you use up hearts, and this will result in a special attack based on whatever glyphs you have equipped. There's a village that basically acts as a hub world for the game. Everyone's been kidnapped for some reason, and you need to find and rescue them. Oh, and don't forget to rescue their cats too. Once they're back in the village, they can help you out. The shop has some really expensive stuff to buy. Oddly, you now select your stage with a map screen. All of the stages add up to 100% map completion. Right off the bat, this is definitely the toughest one of these games. Most enemies barely give any experience points, and even the most basic ones are damage sponges. There are a few good places to grind, but not many. And it takes a while, and you don't power up much when you do level up. But you'll have to do it, otherwise you stand absolutely no chance. You can't take much damage, and the healing items that you can buy don't restore much health. The stages themselves aren't very interesting. Some areas just have you run to the right and there's really nothing to find or even any bosses to fight. They're just there. I'm also not a fan of the equipment menu. Some items are listed twice even though you definitely only have one, and some are different colors than others. The good news though is that once again there are absolutely no touchscreen gimmicks forced on you. Graphically, Order of Ecclesia excels. Even though you get a lot of recycled sprites, everything still looks incredible. I love the lights and the shadows in the prison stage, or the crazy waves in the Collidus channel. It might even be enough to make some people motion sick. The sound and music are good, but I've got to say that nothing here really stands out. It's certainly nowhere near as bad as Harmony of Dissonance, but it feels like maybe there was some creative burnout happening. In fact, that's what the entire game feels like. I don't blame them. I mean, they were pumping these out left and right. As a player, I was getting burnt out at this time too. I remember saying to myself that after I beat this one, I'm done with these games for quite some time. Unfortunately, these games didn't exactly end on the best note, but that said, it's not exactly a bad game by any means. This is the worst game in this episode, and if the worst is this good, I'll certainly take it. there you go. Every 2D Castlevania game in the Metroid style for you. So how do I rank them? Well, gotta say that Symphony of the Night is still my favorite. It's incredibly awesome. I mean, it may just be because it's on a console that hooks up to your TV, but hey, my favorite's my favorite. However, my next favorite is Aria of Sorrow, and they just did an incredible job on this one, and I think a lot of people agree. Next favorite, Portrait of Ruin. I didn't really ruin much with this one. It's not the best, but hey, it's still good. My least favorite, Order of Ecclesia. Is that how you pronounce it? Well, it is now, Ecclesia. This one is not my favorite. That doesn't mean it's a bad game at all. It's just the worst 2D Castlevania Metroid game, in my opinion. What's your opinion? How do you rank them? Let me know. In the meantime, thank you for watching GameSack. Die, monster! You don't belong in this world! It's your line, man. I don't think so. Come on! Ooh, I'll play.